Ready to go? Good evening. I'd like to call to order the October 17th meeting of the Falmouth Planning Board. The first thing on our agenda tonight is the minutes from October 3rd.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval of the minutes of October 3rd as printed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next on this is public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to comment on any issues, town issues that are not on our agenda tonight? This is specifically for things not on our agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on.
Okay. I'll move that we take the agenda out of order
Sandlin.
for the Sandlin Family Trust decision.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Applicant, Sandlin Family Trust, definitive plan to subdivide existing single-family lot into 8 lots. For the applicant. Oh, we're actually just having a discussion tonight, sorry. We've already heard it all.
Decision.
A decision.
Decision. Want me to read the
Yes,
motion?
Bob, could you read the motion, please?
Okay. Draft definitive plan motion, 10/17/2017. Motion that the planning board vote to approve the application of Sandlin Family Trust under Article 4, or Article 4, definitive plans, Chapter 305 subdivision regulations of the town of Falmouth for a plan entitled Definitive Subdivision Plan Prepared for Sandlin Family Trust, Maravista, Falmouth, Massachusetts, being a subdivision of lot 572 as shown on LC Plan 4286-5, prepared by BSS Designing, dated September 19, 2016, revised September 5, 2017, scale 1 inch equals 40 feet, together with the roadway plan and profiles of the same title and dates with the following findings and conditions. Findings. The applicant seeks to subdivide 7.57 acres of residential C-zone land into 8 lots located at 209 Maravista Avenue, assessment map number 39A260000572. For access to 5 of these lots, the applicant proposes to utilize existing frontage on the town-accepted ways of Cedar Street and Maravista Avenue. The board finds this acceptable. In the revised plan for the remaining 3 lots, the applicant proposes to upgrade approximately 564 feet of Cypress Street to an overall width of 21 feet, including a 1-foot berm, and to a construction standard typical of the existing town ways in the vicinity. The design of Cypress Street has also incorporated the attendant drainage facilities to the satisfaction of the board. Water service to Lot 7 and 8 will be provided over Lot 6 via an easement depicted on the plan as 10 feet wide. Pursuant to the town water superintendent's referral dated September 26, 2016, the language of this easement shall be submitted to the board for approval prior to definitive plan endorsement. The subdivision is located in the Coastal Pond Overlay District for Little Pond, but will tie into the Little Pond sewer service area. Therefore, the planning board need not require an impact report on nitrogen abatement. Waivers. A list of waivers from the planning board's rules and regulations in the form of a letter dated September 19, 2019 from BSS Designing has been submitted and is incorporated by reference here. Except as modified by this decision, the board finds these waivers acceptable, consistent with the typical roadway construction found in the neighborhood while still providing suitable access to the lots in the subdivision. Conditions. 1. The applicant shall provide 10-foot wide easement for water service to lots 7 and 8 over lot 6. Prior to plan endorsement, the applicant shall submit a written easement for utility purpose to the planning board for approval in form for recording at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds. 2. A suitable bond or covenant shall be submitted within 6 months of this decision, or the board may take action to rescind this plan. 3. Prior to the final release of the covenant or bond, the applicant shall provide an electronic version of the subdivision plan in a portable document file, PDF file format.
Second.
So we've had a motion and a second. We've seen this a lot. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All set. Next.
I move that we go back to the original agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Do we have any A&Rs?
We do not.
Okay. Next is public discussion continued. Applicant Kenneth Caputo, site plan review to construct a new 51,114 urgent care medical facility located at 40 Davis Straits. For the applicant.
Good evening. Ken Caputo, project delivery. I do have hard copies of the presentation. If you want to pass those through the board.
We need to drive that for you. The mouse has died, and we're going to have someone
Oh, okay.
manually do it for you.
Does the pointer work?
I don't think so. I think the battery's...
No battery. All right.
We got a whole new setup coming, they tell us, so... you're looking
Well,
for-
we've got it on the screen, that's the most important part. Ken Caputo with Caputo Project Delivery Solutions. With me tonight is Mr. Tom Scott from SGA Architects, Peter Bassett, Atlantic Investment, and John Novick from Conoco Engineers and Scientists. So we're here, follow up to our hearing from the end of September. There's been some correspondence back. The board gave us some comments on site plan that we attempted to address, as well as comments on design review relative to building that I will let Mr. Scott take you through what changes we were able to process with our tenant. So starting with site plan, I'm going to follow the same format you directed us through the last time. Meaning MD, I'm going to zip right through these, we don't need these. Here's our site at 40 Davis Straits, the corner of Dillingham Ave and Davis Straits, Route 28. The existing gas service station that's there, it's been there since, I believe, the 1950s or early 1960s. Our mission here is to take what you see in the bottom corner, the canopy, the small service station, the expansive area of pavement and curb cuts, and begin the process of transforming this property, go ahead, next slide, into something that follows many of the guidelines in terms of the town's vision for Davis Straits in their reset study, significant increases in landscaping, the new building in place of the old 1950s garage and canopy. And we'll get right into it as far as what we changed. Next slide. So real quickly, I just wanted, I did not have this in the presentation before and realized that I should have, because I think it makes a very effective presentation to get started with. And this is our existing condition. The lot is 31,000 square feet and change. So it's about 3/4 of an acre, just a little over. And you can see the canopy in the front with the dark dashed line, right up on the street line with the service pumps, the concrete pad for the underground storage tanks, which have been removed, and then the service building itself sitting there in the lot. There's really literally no landscaping or little landscaping at all. You have a small pocket in the top left corner. Most of the landscaping is really out on the street, and even that is kind of old and unmaintained. The sidewalk is broken down. You only have sidewalk on Dillingham Avenue and around the corner onto Davis Straits, where there is a crosswalk across Davis Straits there today, and a ramp. Again, that sidewalk is in pretty tough condition. A little bit of landscaping in front of the canopy, again, mostly streetscape, and a broken down planter between us and the 99, unfortunately. Very wide curb cuts, as you can see, especially on Davis Straits. 2 curb cuts, I believe they're both in excess of 45 feet. That, of course, was because of the need to circulate the fuel tankers in and out of the property. But we also have 2 fairly undefined curb cuts on Dillingham Avenue. So we have a total of 4 curb cuts, literally no landscaping between us and our neighbors either. Next slide. So here begins the mission to transform the property. We've done a lot of work, as we presented last time. We are before the zoning board for a special permit because of our interest in moving the building forward, not to just move the building forward. We wanted to move the building forward so we would have adequate space behind the building to create that 11-space parking area, which significantly reduced the size and cleaned up the circulation of our side field parking, side field relative to Davis Straits. Some of the things that the board commented on that I will highlight on this plan. One is the desire to see the parking spaces that are facing Dillingham. You wanted some type of screening there to block the headlights of cars parking there from projecting out onto Dillingham Ave. We did add a evergreen shrub row across that frontage so that it will block those headlights as you requested. Another matter that came up was the side of our building facing the 99. It was really just, the 99 property is at the bottom of the screen. Really just was grass in our original plan. But we had some comments, both from this board and I believe the ZBA, through the special permit hearing that we had a couple weeks ago, wanted that foundation line broken up more. So we have added landscaping to that side of the building so that we break up the foundation line. We still have our street trees around, but one of the other comments and discussion that we had was whether there was adequate site lighting on the property for the parking and movement across the parking aisles. What we've done is there's 4 block dots. There's 2 at each end of the 10-space row, and there's 2 at each end of the 11-space row. And what that's for is to provide lighting for the parking that's away from the building. The lighting at the building will be adequate to illuminate those first parking rows. The lighting style will be pedestrian scale, probably 14 feet to the top of the luminaire, dark sky compliant. Very similar, quite honestly, if you want to get a good example, look right out the window here. When I left the meeting room, the hearing, the last time we were here, the first thing I was struck by was the site lighting design here at Town Hall. And I said, that's what we want to do. And that kind of architectural style, the spacing is the same as what I'm telling you is on this plan. It provides a nice lighting level for the parking lot so people can be seen, they can see where they're walking. So we did add that lighting to the plan as requested. We also added on the top of those Dillingham spaces what we call a stormwater filter strip. And we removed the berm curb at that point. The parking lot, and if we can go to the next slide. These bullet points we talked about before, I don't need to repeat them. Next one, please. There we go. So the parking lot was originally graded. This whole side parking field drained in 2 directions, one out to Davis Straits, one out to Dillingham Ave. Both this board and the engineering department said, no. We don't drain out onto the public streets. We thought initially that because that's where our stormwater went under the current condition, that as long as we matched it, it would be okay, but we understand that we want to contain the drainage on site. So what we did was by removing that berm and some spot grade changes, that entire parking field now will drain across towards Dillingham through the filter strip. Some will infiltrate indirectly, but it will then grade into what's an existing low point on the property over at the corner of Dillingham and Davis Straits. Now that low point's been shaped a little bit. It's not a detention basin, although it may function like that. It's very shallow. And we've added 2 leaching basins in that low point. So all the water from this parking lot and the side parking lot here is going to go into that low area and infiltrate into the ground. In addition, talking to the engineering staff today here in town, We had the driveways themselves were still draining out onto the two streets. And they asked us to look at a solution that would eliminate, other than the driveway apron itself that's on the town right-of-way, eliminate that from running off onto the street as well. So this is a late change. It's not in the plan set update that you had from a little over a week ago, but it will be in the conform plans that are stamped as part of your decision for reference. We've added a catch basin on each driveway. We have cross-sloped the driveway, so the water will run to that catch basin, and we have pipe connect those two catch basins over to the leaching basin. At the end of the day, this low area, this depression, with those two leaching basins, will easily manage the 25-year storm event, which is, again, another one of your regulations relative to stormwater management. Just to remind the board, our entire roof is also infiltrated. In this system down at the bottom, it's a series of Coltech stormwater recharge underground. Roof will be connected to that at both ends. And at this point, you can see that probably 70 to 75% of our site, a site that has no stormwater recharge right now, has full stormwater recharge capable of managing 25-year storm event. Big improvement for the property, big improvement for runoff conditions to the public ways. So that was added as far as the grading, the stormwater filter strip as well. Can we go back 2 slides, please? There we go. Another feature, we talked about the Davis Straits Reset Study. We talked about its goals and vision for pedestrian access, intermodal, more than just vehicles. I know this is an urgent care facility, and I'm probably speculating correctly that a significant amount of our patients will come by car. But nonetheless, we did add benching in the overhang facing Davis Straits for outside seating. A lot of times we get into these facilities, as good as they are, and as quickly as they process patients, those of us who aren't the patient, when our friends or family are in getting examined, we like to sit outside and relax. We provided benches for that purpose. You still have the walkway, and that whole walkway, by the way, on Davis Straits is a new sidewalk that doesn't exist today. So we're trying to help build that pedestrian connection, not just for us, but for people who are going by the property as well. We also added a bicycle rack on the side of the building, just beyond the canopy, so that we have bicycle, a secure place to lock a bicycle if anyone chooses to come here by bicycle, including our staff, who may end up living nearby and want to bike to work. So we did add those features. Again, that was another request of the board. Okay, continuing. I think we're going to, that was the, can we go to the last slide real quick? Just want to point out a couple of supportive points before we go into your design review role and talk about building. We believe that this site is very consistent with your reset study goals. We were happy to find that study. It provided a lot of guidance. We know that the use is favorable in terms of the economic goals cited in that study. We know that the building front setback, being in the front setback, 15 feet back, by the way, that canopy is 4.5 feet from the front setback, from the front property line. Our building's 15 feet. We know that being in that front setback is not only consistent with the study, but it's also not going to have an impact on the visual character of the neighborhood, especially with the landscaping design and the building design as well. We believe represents a tremendous improvement over the former use and condition. Even if that use was active today, you wouldn't be approached to do any of the things that are proposed to improve this corner. And that the streetscape, the smaller curb cuts, the pedestrian improvements, the expansion of walkway, really will transform this corner in town, and it's a significant corner, into a very inviting and attractive place that I think you can all be, we'll all be very happy. So with that, that's what I had on site plan.
Pat?
You referred to evergreens that will shield the headlights from Dillingham. What kind of evergreen are you talking about?
I knew you were gonna ask that.
Of course you did.
And I'm gonna have to come over and look at my plan, because
It doesn't
I need to
say.
see what type of plant it is. I need to look at this.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I knew I should have prepared for that question.
And we want to know what size they are going in.
Yeah.
You know, what, how many gallon, and how many of them.
You know what this is? There's 27 of them.
Doesn't tell me what they are.
Henry Garnett Sweet Spire.
No idea what that is.
I know it's everywhere.
Yeah.
What's the length, I want to try to get the spacings, what's the length of the, got to divide it by 27 to figure it out.
The 27? Oh, it's across, well, 10 spaces, 90 feet. So they're gonna grow, they have to be spaced a little bit so they grow in together. But they will form, and this was the direction given to our landscape architect, they will form a solid hedge.
Okay. I have to take your word for it because I have no idea what that
I don't know
is.
what head is either.
I just know the last time we asked for this, we listened to this argument and they put them in, and it's 5 years later, they still haven't grown together. They're not
Those were privets.
Yeah, but they're not performing
They're not.
the way they're designed. And the other way to solve that is you double staker, and then you fill in the gap and it goes away.
Yeah, well, 27, you're gonna get, if it was, when we could make it 30 for easy math.
Every 3 feet apart, that's not very big. That's a lot of gap. But how big are these plants when they start?
Oh, they'll probably be 2.5, 3 feet tall. Yep. Now, if there's a desire, because we still have to issue the stamp set, if there's a desire for another type, I know one, off the top of my head, but
Well, there's a desire to block the lights within the first
Exactly.
year. That's all and if they're capable of doing that, it works. If they're not, they don't.
and we know that's the intent. So I'm sure our landscape architect gave us a good selection.
That's what we instructed him to do. That's what we instructed.
That was the instructions given to the landscape architect.
It'll be okay if
You think so?
they spread. And evergreen is better than the privet. But I don't
All
know
right.
what it is.
Yes.
Okay?
I mean, if it's the preference of the board, there's yews and there's boxwoods that I do know that will,
If your landscape architect says that, 1 year after they're planted, they'll be blocking headlights, that's all we're really asking for.
that's it.
We don't want to wait 5 years till they grow up.
We don't either, because I think in this layout, it's a nice accent and it's a great feature for our front yard. And we're gonna be very particular about maintaining what this is a significant investment on the part of the project in this landscape. Because of the corner, because of the prominence of this corner, that was the instruction given.
Paul?
It says 2 years on the guarantee on the plant drawings, by the way, so you gotta be there for at least 2 years. Quick question. My main concern was if stormwater runoff. I think you've addressed that issue. We talked a lot about the layout, and I think you followed the Davis Straits study quite well, so I think that's an improvement.
Thank you.
Any other site plan questions?
I don't have any questions, I have a comment when you're ready.
On site plan? Well, I have a question, then you can go, okay?
Okay.
Last time we were here, they were unsure whether on the western property line, the water was actually leaving the site and going into the neighbor. It wasn't clear whether or not you had prevented that. Does this design keep all the runoff from not only the roof, but all the parking on the site, and none of it going into the neighbors?
No.
It doesn't do that?
The amount of water that runs off to those properties has been reduced, but not eliminated.
That's generally a requirement we have. Keep all the water on
Typically,
site.
the requirement we designed to, again, I know your streets and street opening, your curb cut permits require this, But typically, when we're dealing with, water eventually has to go somewhere off of properties, and we don't increase, and where we can, we decrease the amount of, not just the volume, but the rate of runoff to those properties. There is a filter strip on that edge to help filter it in, the small amount that goes there. This area right here, this corner is another filter strip. So in a normal rain event, most of that water will hit that filter strip and start to percolate into the ground, which it doesn't do today. It sheet flows right off onto the back side of those properties. No different than if we were designing and we had property that drained across our property. We would have to manage that. We wouldn't be able to block it because we would flood our neighbor just by blocking the runoff from their own property. Water runs by gravity across properties. That's what it does, and it was not our intent to trap all of our water on our site. We can't. As it is, your own design standard is 25 years. So when you get a heavy event, things are going to surcharge, they're going to overflow, and they're going to go in other places.
There's a big grade change back there too, right? There's a big grade change back there.
Sir, if you would like to come up and identify yourself, you're allowed to do that. Okay, John?
I just wanted to say that it appears that the site design, including the landscaping and the sidewalks and the bike racks and the benches, is a very nice improvement for what currently exists there.
Well, thank you for your help
And
and
you
your
can see you
suggestions.
put a lot of effort into it.
Okay, now we can go into design review of the structure.
Starts with the existing one side.
Hi, I'm Tom Scott, the architect for the project. The image that's up on the screen is the previous image that we had presented to the board, which met with some disfavor. We took back a number of recommendations, and we've come up with a compromise solution. It's not a full solution. We've really had to weigh the suggestions that we got from the board against what the tenant and the client is requesting of us, and we've come up with a few modifications to the design that I think help the design overall. We've definitely changed the overall color palette of the building. We've gone to a Cape Cod gray clapboard on all of the vertical surfaces of the building. We've changed the color of the stone so that it is a gray pattern that matches more closely to the color palette of the building. We've introduced a commercial window, a more residential style window, a 2/1 window, so it'll be trimmed out with trim boards, headers, and crown moldings, so that it has a more residential feel. The cornice and eave banding at the top of the wall is all wide, 12-inch wide eave banding. Again, those are all white trim elements around the perimeter of the building, and the roof has been changed over the main portion of the building to a mansard style with a asphalt shingle roof. The tenant has felt very strongly about the impact that the dominant element on the elevation, which is the corner tower element, that really needed to be there for their branding, their image in the community, and their ability to be recognized within the retail area that this resides. So that particular element has not changed significantly. We did change the stone, the clapboard, and some of the trim elements, but overall, these are the modifications that we've come up with that are a compromise that moves us, I think, closer, more in the direction of what the board had requested last time.
Paul?
I think it's a big improvement in what we saw earlier. I think the signage is much smaller too. So I think there's an improvement there.
Pam?
So I understand branding, however you want to phrase it, but you haven't built in Massachusetts, right?
Yes, I have.
Is that right? So there really is no branding that transfers from New Hampshire to Massachusetts for it to be somewhat recognizable when someone is driving by. So you're really starting afresh here.
Well, I think it's more about their corporate brand and their image as a business. So this, if you look at some of the other buildings that they've built, they have a very similar brand element, which is that tower element that kind of defines who they are, or I guess the recognition of their business to people maybe passing by. So they feel very strongly about that image. I think they're going to build more and more of these buildings throughout Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and they're trying to keep that image alive and moving forward as they continue to develop more and more sites.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is you have no image in Massachusetts. So whatever you develop for here, and the Cape is not like Boston. It's not like most other parts of the state of Massachusetts. So you could develop a whole new brand for Massachusetts because no one is going to connect the New Hampshire and the Massachusetts. And I don't find this, I find the changes that you made are much more aesthetically Cape Cod-ish, but that bright red metal roof, I just find not only that it doesn't fit here on the Cape, and I think we mentioned that last time, and I suggested you drive around, you look at some of the eastern banks and some of the other buildings, but I don't want to seem in any way, I don't care about the brand. I honestly don't care. I want it to look nice in the town of Falmouth. This is an area that we want redeveloped, and we want it to look Cape Cod-ish, and we want it to look attractive. So the branding, that's not, for me, that's just a non-starter.
But
Because,
for the client, it's pretty important. It's their corporate image. And, you know, just as any, like the Stop and Shops that you see around, they all have kind of a similar Cape, like the ones on the Cape, they all have a similar image that fit in very well with the Cape Cod.
exactly, but they don't look the same as some of the stores in other communities, you know, outside of the Boston area. They're very different. So what I'm suggesting is have another image that will spread throughout Massachusetts because, you know, I don't care about the brand from New Hampshire.
Bob, you have something to say on this? Go back there.
Yeah, I totally agree. The corner tower is the thing I object to the most because it's Rite Aid and CVS have the same design, exact same design. You can put Rite Aid in that big square under the on the tower. It's the same thing. What we want is something that is going to reflect Falmouth. Falmouth is a seaside community. It's not in the middle of the state. It's not Poughkeepsie. It's Falmouth, and we want something that's going to reflect that. This is an area that we're in the process of redeveloping. This could be a cornerstone of that redevelopment. We want this to look good. We don't care about the branding because this is going to be something that we're going to have to look at long after you're gone. And we want it to look like it belongs in Falmouth and not someplace else.
I can tell you your efforts to make this logo architecture what your tenant wants, it's exactly what we don't want. It's exactly 100% opposite. And we call this logo architecture. So your building is your giant sign. They'll have these up and down the East Coast. They're everywhere. When you drive down a Falmouth street, we want you to know, geez, this is Cape Cod, not like you see everywhere else. And this is exactly what we do not want. So we heard you, we want you to hear us. Pat?
Well, I'm looking at this, and also in regard to the handout that you gave us last time. You didn't really do anything, because the handout has the same kind of roof that you put on what was a flat roofed building before. It has a multi-panel, it's got 8/1 windows. You've got 2/1 that you've just put on. You just changed the signature on it. Yes, you did change the color, that is better. I disagree with Paul about the sizing of the sign. It is identical in size. I was just doing the flip test. It's totally identical, and I can just see this. Okay, now we slapped the sign on there, just identical to what it was. That is not what we want. The red metal roof could be changed over to the same shingles that you're using on the rest of it. The tower could be lowered a little bit. It would make it a lot better. But this is not what we wanted when we told you to go back and redo it, because really, you just took this and flipped it into here and changed the colors. It's not what we want. And we disagree, I'm hearing this, we disagree that you're meeting the reset. They were talking about the community character that we're building. This is not helping to build that community character here. Yes, you're taking a horrible corner. You're taking a decrepit building and you're replacing it. I agree with that, but you are replacing the building. And that certainly should meet the standards that we are looking for. We have accepted that reset concept, and that's what we're building towards here. We really want you to make the town proud of what you're doing here. The landscape is fabulous. That's a good start.
We suggested you review the CVS case. Did you go and look at their original design and see what they finally got passed? And did you see how they did it?
Yeah.
Well, we're heading in the same direction here.
So I think at minimum, with what you've come back with today, we would have to ask you for an extension because the final date on this is November 7th. And so we would have to ask you for an extension on the deadline, probably to, I would say, what, mid-December? Because we've got town meeting coming up. And you need some time to go back and think this over again and make it something that we can really approve, because the alternative is we could send it off to the Cape Cod Commission for a character analysis to see whether it meets anything. And I don't think you want to do that.
I think we've heard the points, and we have a tenant requirement that we have to be respectful of. We do. I have to state the facts of where we are. We did review what we could find on the case that you referred to. And I guess it leads me to a couple of questions. And I have to ask these questions. I have to understand where we stand. Because I'm not a lawyer. And we have come here without really any direct representation on the legal side. But I do have to ask a question. In the case, I believe that the planning board was the special permit granting authority. In which case, this design review as advisory to your authority of approval as special permit granting authority. I guess my question is, as you're now the acting design review committee, because the citizen volunteer group wasn't working out, is my understanding. I think you told us that last time. Somebody advised us that. In this case, which is different than CVS, the special permit granting authority is the ZBA. And my question for you is, does your role in the design review committee refer in an advisory role to the ZBA, or does it have a binding, enforceable action under site plan review? We really need to know. I don't know the answer.
Neither do we, but we know our alternative. If we don't like what we see, we can refer it to the Cape Cod Commission. And that seems to be, it's different.
Under site plan review?
Yes.
And
So it's up to you. You want to deal with us or deal with them? It's
the
your
operative
choice.
question there would be
Yeah, these are questions. I'm just
character.
trying to, so that we can understand and we can advise everybody on our team, of our process. We seek to engage in a positive process. And we know that we have an architectural style that, as Tom has pointed out, is what I would call critical to our prospective tenant. And we know that architectural style, amongst many of the board members here, is not what you're hoping for in the redevelopment of this property. But I do need to know so I can advise them as far as there's also the side of getting through the process and getting through the process successfully. But process has limitations for all of us. We have rules we have to abide by. The board has governing rules.
Well, if you want to test the limits, it's up to you. We're advising you that this isn't working, and we want you to come back. If you prefer to just test it, that's up to you.
And that, in turn, is what you're saying, your
Well,
typical
your question is whether we
procedure
have the
is to
legal right.
refer
We
to
don't know.
Cape
We'll
Cod
find out, I
Commission.
guess.
Because I'm not familiar with Cape Cod Commission's jurisdiction
Just-
in a site this small.
Right?
Let's not get into the legalisms.
All right, go.
All right, the board is within its rights certainly to refer to the regional agency, and they certainly have every legal right to look at the architecture. This board has typically not had discretionary referrals, limited discretionary referrals under the Commission Act. We typically work these things out with the applicant beforehand. So we're sort of, charting a little new ground here. But certainly, in the background, under the zoning bylaw, you have this design review function. It's not as clear-cut under the zoning as it would be the Commission Act. But you were certainly within your rights to refer it as a limited discretionary DRI. They would take jurisdiction of the project under community character as a limited DRI.
Pam?
I would think your client, who is looking to come into Massachusetts, would want to come in here with a very positive initiation to Massachusetts, and especially to Cape Cod. And I would think you're persuasive enough that you could present to your client pictures of other buildings that have gone through this process and what they have, in the end, look like. And that they would want to fit in and not look like something out of, I love New Hampshire, but look like something out of another place and time, but that doesn't fit here. So I think, you have your job cut out to go back and convince your client they're coming into a whole new area. There is no branding here because no one knows about those places. And you have an opportunity to come in, with a bang and have something that's so attractive that, people who are ill are going to want to run there.
Yeah, I hate the word branding. I like what Tom did with the main structure and the mansard. These elevations are what I would call somewhat naked because you don't have the benefit of all of the trees and landscaping, and you don't even see a bench in the front elevation, unfortunately. So you don't see how that's going to build around the perimeter and complement the building. We were hopeful that our investment in the property itself, the land, the visual aesthetics, and the breakup of this through landscaping, through site design, that this model and architectural changes with the mansard and the stone color would be helpful in bringing this feature and this tenant to this community. There's no doubt, no contesting their reputation, their services that they'll provide, the jobs and the wages that they'll provide. Everything's good about this. And it sounds like it's the one feature that you'd like us to try to take another shot at, I guess.
And if the service and the company is so wonderful, it doesn't need a building to advertise it.
I don't disagree with that statement.
And you have to understand, this is the first one coming into our new reset, and it'll be setting the pattern for everybody.
Yeah, I like to think we took a pretty good shot at it.
Well, I think your site work is phenomenal.
It's beautiful.
We're really happy with the site work.
Right.
But this board took over design review just in the last 2 years, so it's new to us too. We've only done a few of them, and we did it because the people before us were not doing it right.
And I understand
Because
it's,
we weren't having
even when it
cooperation.
was and what it is now,
So
I'm pretty sure
it doesn't matter, we're here and now.
it's advisory, and believe me, when I say advisory, myself and Mr. Bassett, we don't typically like to go forward with a negative referral comments
Sure.
wherever that advisory.
Excuse me for a
It's
second.
not a, I'm sorry, that is correct, that's not an advisory role. It's a decision of the board that would be attached to the building permit. The Board of Appeals is looking at a special permit under a 240-3 to make a finding that it's not substantially more detrimental. But you are not having an advisory role, it's a decision that attaches to the building permit.
And they're also moving this building closer to the street than,
And that's why they're. in
that's
front of the
why they're
board.
there. So you're building a non-conforming building right from the get-go. So you are in the special permit
And
process.
just-
With the ZBA.
But that's a different role and responsibility and process. Your decision attaches to the building permit.
Building, right,
Okay, and that is enforceable by the building commissioner.
yeah. And I think we made it clear how we feel about the building.
I think you did.
Yeah.
So what does the board want to do? So I guess my question then to the board would be the decision timeframe. Are they having a side conversation?
Excuse us. We would like to, we'd like to see if we have any public comment now. If you'd like to finish up, what figure what to say, you can come back. Anyone from the public have anything to say? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jill Neubauer, and I'm an architect in Falmouth. Tonight's my first night to see this building, so I've not prepared anything before this. I agree with what Pamela was saying, that in the way that a Walgreens is designed to go into any community in America, it has become an unaesthetic, highly unfortunate building in every town in America. And this building has many of the characteristics of a Walgreens and that type of building. And it cannot recommend itself architecturally to any community. Every site is an asset. This is an important site. No building can use a bench or any vegetation to fix its architecture. And you have to look at a building as a straight-on project, and then you have to look at it in context. And so this building, again, is being reviewed without any of its neighbors. We don't actually know the scale of this relative to the other buildings. But it appears that the height of the building is programmatically unnecessary. And what I mean by programmatically is it's likely that the space above the windows, once you have your HVAC systems in, is just mass created to create more presence with what they're allowed to do with zoning. And I would argue that it's not helpful to the building, and being more massive does not make your branding bigger and more successful. The stone corner treatment is one of the most unfortunate architectural elements to this building. It is, it creates a massiveness, it emphasizes its height. The relationship of the small roof edge detail sitting on those massive stone corners with the recessed trim at the top is, in my mind, a disconnect between the architectural elements and isn't helping the building. I would hope that the owners of this company and the marketing agency that they look to would re-examine their marketing and their branding. Because if you need to identify yourself from community to community with one bad building after another bad building, I think you haven't dug deep enough into what it means to be an institution of quality and integrity. The signage could be modest, it could be dignified, it could lead by example. Rather than looking like the tire store down the road, which has large signage on it, maybe it could follow the dignity of Cape Cod Healthcare's urgent care that has a modest, elegant wooden sign out front. And so I encourage the board to continue to do the aesthetic work that you are trying to do. I encourage the client to hear what they're saying, because a building matters entirely to a town. It sets the texture, it sets the tone, it sets everything for a town. Before you put the stuff in that building, it's what we look at and live with. And I personally would not want this building, in its size, in its detailing, to exist in that form. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? You were finishing, you were talking amongst yourself. Do you have anything else to say?
Again, as a matter of procedure, are we all set with site plan part of the review? And, go ahead.
We have integrated the design review into the site plan, so we do it all at one time.
Okay,
So,
all part of one decision?
yes.
All right. I think we should continue. Huh?
Is there any more work we have to do on site?
Yeah. Oh, I think we hit that.
Landscaping. I think we're
100%.
satisfied with that.
It's,
I think you've answered all our questions, and you've had good comments on the site.
yeah.
And does anyone have any real objections? We didn't, did we? Everyone liked it.
So we do want to continue the hearing. I would ask, we will need to seek some guidance here in town. I want to bring back to our tenant some real answers relative to how this process can unfold if we continue on this path versus an alternate path. So I'm going to have to do some research and seek some guidance. Specifically, whether Brian is, you can help us, or it's someone else in that regard. I think what will help us in the process will be to properly advise our tenant, and maybe he can seek some guidance here in town himself from local council. As far as, I want to make sure he understands the implications of what you're saying and what we're proposing, and maybe there's another step that can be taken that will bring us together. So I'd like to continue this hearing if that's all right with the board.
We need a date, Brian? What's our deadline here?
See, today is the 17th. So next week is the 24th.
24th.
And then we have town meeting. So if you could have something here on the 24th, and the board can take a look at it, you would have to decide it that night, which is going to be very difficult. So the first step would probably be to get an extension of time. So we can look at this after town meeting, because the deadline here is November 12th. The town meeting is the 6th and 7th. We won't be meeting that week. We can look at it on the 24th, and if you're not happy on the 24th, you could refer to the Cape Cod Commission. They're meeting the 26th. If things don't work out. So I guess the question would be whether you would be prepared in 1 week, because that's when this board needs to make a decision. It doesn't seem quite...
We have a very
Right.
capable and talented architect here that loves to work nights and weekends. So I am sure that
Well, we can have...
if we can get some answers that will help us
Well, why
in
don't you
our
ask your-
dialogue
well,
with
how
the
about,
tenant.
can you ask that question now? I could probably just answer it.
Say that again.
Could you ask the question now? I could probably just answer it. If you're looking for design guidance, you mean? I think the board's given you plenty of design guidance.
Oh, I think we know exactly what the board wants.
Right, so I'm not sure what other guidance is required.
So,
I mean, I can give you procedural.
it will help the dialogue with our tenant potentially.
All right, then we can talk offline.
Okay.
Let's,
We need to
Let's
pick
hear
a
it.
date.
you know, it's not a hearing, it's a site plan review, so we'll see you again next week,
Okay,
the 24th.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there's the 17th. It's the 17th.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point of order, procedural-wise. Could we take the next item out of order? It'll take about 2 minutes in case there's someone here in the audience on that matter. The Messer, they're seeking to withdraw their application. I should have done that a while ago.
Okay, so I move that we take the Messer application out of order.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And we have a letter requesting,
You should have in your package a letter
Withdraw?
requesting simply to withdraw this application at this time and return it at another date. A simple vote of the board is necessary. I apologize if there's anyone in the audience who's been waiting on that.
I move that we accept the request to withdraw.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none? Okay.
Done. Thank you.
Then I move that we go back to the normal order of business.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Applicant Town of Falmouth, site plan review to reconfigure and reconstruct the parking spaces at 744 Main Street.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm James McLaughlin, town engineer. With us tonight is the Deputy Director of Public Works, Peter McConerty, and our engineering consultant, Sean Reardon from Tetra Tech. And we've submitted a site plan to reconstruct and reconfigure the existing parking lot at 744 Main Street, which is the Eddie Marks Building and the Gus Canty Center, and also to include the proposed senior center. And without going into any additional detail, I'll turn it over to our consultant, Sean Reardon, and he'll go through the site plan that was submitted to the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim mentioned, my name is Sean Reardon. I'm a Vice President with Tetra Tech, Land Development Civil Engineer. We were hired by the DPW to take a plan that they had developed cooperatively with the police department, with the planning department, and advance it through design, kind of vet through some different discussion items and kind of fine tune it into a submittal suitable to submit to the planning board. We had really three principal goals. The first was obviously to improve parking. That was
John, can you hit the lights again? We're going to be looking at this on screen.
I turned them off, John.
That's it, okay. You already turned off. This one's pretty bright. You have requested it's too,
Well, it's very
it's hard to see from here.
dim,
Can you shut this one off?
and I don't know how it's,
Is that better?
it's better, yes.
Thank you.
Can you see your notes?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, our main goal was to improve parking, and with that, we include access and circulation. So it's not just a matter of creating parking spaces, it's a matter of creating safe circulation, safe pedestrian movement, and really good access from Main Street and also secondarily from Dillingham. The other aspect was to take what is now a kind of a combined site with the police department and give the police department a segregated sort of access route, which is not encumbered by kind of the public movements of vehicles. So that was one of our goals as well. And then finally, to see what we can do within a relatively constrained palette to upgrade the aesthetics in the area in anticipation of the senior center. So if you could advance to the next stage, next slide. So we've got three slides. One is the layout and materials plan. The second is a grading and drainage plan. The last is a landscape plan. So feel free to interrupt, I don't know if it's proper, but I'm more than comfortable addressing questions as we go through the slide. So what I want to do is call attention to a couple details here. So as you can see, it's a little bit difficult to make out, but this is the Gus Marks building here. This is the future site of the senior center, and then the Eddie Marks building is down here with the police station up back. We have Main Street oriented at the bottom of the page. What we've done is, as I mentioned earlier, we've segregated the police access. So there's a dedicated entrance for the police, would remove that island, remove a utility pole, try and make it easier for the police to come freely out of that entrance, but segregate it from the rest of the parking. We'd also have a new one-way entrance. Currently, there's no entrance down by the Falmouth Inn. We'd have a new one-way entrance intended to service, buses and larger vehicles as they might have to access the front of the senior center or the Gus Marks, the Gus Canty Center. We've also upgraded the entrance, the main entrance, which is right in front of the Eddie Marks house, to incorporate 2 turning lanes, so a left turn lane and a right turn lane, and a dedicated in movement as well. The idea here being is to try and kind of get people to process out of that entrance a little bit quicker in a little bit more organized way. One of the other benefits too was we've added a rear access drive. So currently there's a dirt road that leads out of the back of the rec center and connects into Dillingham. We've upgraded that to a one-way out paved road to serve new parking spaces that will be built back behind the rec center. Those spaces, because they're on a pretty steep slope and because they're only going to be able to use that back road to get out, are dedicated to employee use only. So the idea being there is we wouldn't want unfamiliar kind of parkers on a steep 8% slope, because it's just not really an ideal slope for the public to be parking on. We've also increased parking, so the goal here was to try and upgrade parking and get additional spaces so that we can better serve this senior center. Added about 60 spaces. We've also added about a half a dozen or 5 handicap spaces to give better access to the future center. We've also created a little bit better flow pattern, so it's a little bit haphazard out there right now. The parking over by the police station doesn't really line up with the parking over by the rec center. So what we did is we really established 3 consistent aisles that flow from one to the other. So there's no real confusing movements. It's all pretty simple and pretty easy to follow how you get through the site. We've also added end cap islands at each aisle, again, to sort of normalize flow and to segregate the turning movements and the activities that happen in the aisles versus the parking areas. We've got one more kind of sort of official space, the space behind the proposed center. So again, that area up towards the top of the sheet that you see in dark is anticipated to be more of a town function as opposed to a public function. So the idea being is that the public would generally use the massive parking at the front, with the sort of more isolated areas be designated more for employees or for handicap access. One of the other key components is the relocation of the police memorial. So for those of you who are familiar with it, there's a police memorial right in this area currently. So that all is going to get reworked. So part of the plan is to relocate the memorial to an area in front of the police station. That would be done by others, but we want to have a dedicated space for it. And what we did is we just to kind of give a little bit of kind of frame to the discussion, what we thought about was there's a flagpole that we've aligned with the center line of that driveway. So as you come in the entrance and you go up that driveway, the thing you see is the flagpole in between the 2 trees that we're adding, you'll see in a later slide. We've also accommodated pedestrian access through the site safely through striped crossings and sidewalks, all connecting up past the Ed Marks house and into the front of the rec center and the senior center. Any questions on the site plan or the layout?
I do.
Sure.
You have existing gate to remain. I'm assuming that gate's going to be open. This is the one that goes up to the police station, so that people can access the police station?
No, that goes out the back.
That goes out the back, okay.
Just the opposite. The plan is to prevent the public from accessing.
That's
So the
not
idea
public,
is
that's
there's
police
Okay,
only.
so this parking right over here in front of the police station will be public parking?
This here?
Yes?
Yes,
For
so
the
if you're
police.
familiar with the site, the handicap ramp extends off the front of the police station at that location. So the idea is, yes, public would access the police station from that location. All the other area would be for police vehicles only.
Okay, then the other two sort of truncated with dotted lines, like you have the existing gate, are those also gates?
So there's two existing gates. There's one here and one here.
Okay,
Those are going to be maintained. And
okay,
that segregates the police side of the site from the sort of the rec center side of the site.
okay, then you go down from the upper gate, and there's another sort of, a little bit of a leg there with a dashed line across it.
Oh, here?
Yes,
That's where the grade transitions down. There's two, this is how the prisoners, or I guess the people are processed. They come in this way.
okay,
So you're escorted in this way. When you come out this way, you do what you want. So this is the driveway down to the existing overhead door at the police station.
ah,
So because these are overhead doors, it's still a contained site, even though the public can theoretically go down that road.
okay.
Good question.
Yes, Paul?
All this parking is for the senior center and for Gus Canty. What happens when there's a ball game with the Commodores? What's the pedestrian access to the ball game? This looks like it's all open.
Well, right now, the way the public accesses the ball game is they would walk back through this area past the concession area. So we would imagine they'd still use this aisle of sidewalk to get back to the same location.
Well, it used to go right next to Gus Cantry Center. There's a walkway there and going out. If the construction's going on, how are you going to access the Commodore games? I mean, they charge to get in, so I don't think they want you coming in from this long way on the right. And normally it would come in through here, but there's going to be some construction going on. I think it's going to be very confusing.
During construction or
Well,
in the
both
finished
during construction
condition?
and before construction.
Well, admittedly, we didn't think too closely about the Commodores game, but we didn't change the circulation very much. So I don't really have a very good answer for that. I know, where do they process tickets? Do they process tickets at the Dillingham entrance, or do they process tickets down here?
I think it's ticket booth is shown.
Ticket booth on the far side of Gus Canty.
There's a
That's what it
concession
normally
stand
is.
that's right in the back of,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Right there.
Yeah.
The concession stand is right there.
If you don't mind, there's a concession stand right in the back of the lot, so, excuse me, Sean, currently right now, excuse me, Peter McConaughey, WW. The pub, they'll come down through this driveway right here and go back down through this way where the concession stand is, to be able to, there's gates.
There's a gate right there.
They'll be able to get down to the field. So we're not going to really be interfering or working with the Commodore's passage. That's basically going to remain the same.
Well, currently you walk beside the Gus Canty Center. There's a sidewalk that runs between the playground and that takes you down to the,
Correct.
yeah. So you wouldn't be going down that paved area, that parking lot to then access that.
Well, I think what happens is it depends in the future. What we showed, just for clarification, is just the block for the senior center.
Yeah.
But I think with the senior center, when the architect becomes on board, they don't like to build in squares. They're going to want to build jigs and jogs. And so however that building gets orientated against the Gus Canty Center, I don't know how much space is going to be left between the two buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And there is a covered walkway that's part of the rec center that I would imagine would stay in place, allowing passage through this area.
And actually, Peter just brought up a point, because I think part of the rationale for putting the senior center there is to connect to the Gus Canty
I
Center.
think there's going to be some kind of connection.
Yeah, so people are going to have to access through that parking lot.
So you'll be cutting the access down that splits both ways now around what that playground is to just one side, just the western side only.
I think that remains to be determined. So with the design of the of the senior center, that pedestrian movement would have to get detailed.
Yeah, that's a very steep area going down by the ball field there.
On the right side of the sheet?
Yes.
Yeah, it's about an 8% grade.
And it says sign official use only. What's the purpose of these parking lots if it's official use only? There's only one way out to to Dillingham.
Right, so the idea there is that would be for either employees or other town personnel who are familiar with the space and are not part of the general motoring public.
John?
On the one-way exit onto Dillingham Avenue, what do you want to do to prevent people from coming in?
We have a sign. Currently, it's inboard of the building that's out there. We're going to move that a little closer to the street in a later iteration of the plan. But the best we can do right now is signage.
Any consideration for a gate?
There is a gate there now. It's
An arm that would prevent people from just pulling in? You know people are going to drive in that.
I mean, I didn't want to interrupt, but I think that's a detail, as Sean said, that's a detail that can be constructed with when the senior center, that's one of the details that can be put up.
You have two of them for the police department, right? They operate the same.
That's more for security for the police department.
I'm just saying, if you have a one-way exit, you know somebody's going to drive in from Dillingham Avenue. Just a consideration.
It's a consideration that can be brought up as a detail.
It would be pretty easy for the police to see it, though, so I'd imagine it'd be...
Paul?
Put your sign up, see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question.
Sure.
That parking area behind the proposed senior center shows 2 handicap parking.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, there's about 6 or 8 or more handicap parking in that location. Are you eliminating those?
The plan is to divert some of those to the front of the senior center to serve the senior center a little bit better. But what we did is we intentionally, striped full 8-foot spaces in a lot of applications so that if we had to add handicap spaces, you could. But the idea being, when the senior center is constructed, most of the access would want to come from the front of that building.
But they're well used for football, baseball games. I would think where you have the 2, you can easily make 5 handicap parking there
Yeah, I
to
think
accommodate the ball fields.
very easily to convert. You'd basically be a 2 for 3 swap. You'd get 2 handicap spaces for 3 spaces. So I know part of our goal and part of our charge was to try and make this space as utilizable as possible. And we could also, there's temporary things you could do during an event that just basically rope that off and make it only for handicapped vehicles. So what we try to do is design towards the normal average use, and then hopefully during peak uses or these situational events, we can come up with strategies that serve just those needs.
Do you want to speak to the design, the entrance and parking places?
Yeah, so we mentioned that earlier. This design accommodates about 50 to 60 more parking spaces than currently exist, providing additional parking for the senior center when it comes on board.
Well, the 2 parking, handicap parking could easily be 5 for handicap, and that could also be used for the senior center or for Gus Canty. I mean, that could be a designated area for it. And it would make it easier for people to get to the ball field or get to the other buildings as well.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. We can make that very easily.
It's not a big deal.
I think right now we have about, if you take the total number of parking spaces and figure out what the handicap space requirement is, I think we need about 10 or 12. We've provided about 17, so about 5 more than are required. But I know that's not the issue here. The bottom line is there's a lot of solutions that we can provide more handicap spaces if we need to.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to have the handicapped at the entrance senior center, no question about that. I'm just think there should be a few more on the backside.
Sure.
Pam?
This seems
Actually,
like,
I'm sorry, Pam, if I could just interrupt. So Paul, it would be perfect because we could convert
Yeah,
these
exactly.
to parking, and then you just make the other cross hatch. And it would be good to have a little bit extra width there for people to funnel through parking too, so I think that's probably a great addition. Sorry.
that's right. I just look at this and I can't help but think, for seniors, this is exceedingly confusing. And we look to have some sort of and I don't want to get into a discussion of the senior center and the location, but I just know we go to the Gus Canny for all sorts of meetings. And if there's an event going on, usually a game, that the parking is pretty well taken. And when you have seniors, fortunately, most seniors don't use a senior center in the evening. Most seniors don't like to drive at night, or many seniors, I don't want to be general, prefer not to drive at night. But the access, I mean, that's quite a distance from this parking lot to get into the senior center. And I agree, I think there should be as many handicap places toward the back where it's a little bit easier. I mean, I think for me, I'm not sure whether you're doing this for the general public or for the senior center, because this seems to me to be very confusing. Your egress and the circulation here. I mean, I may be a senior, but I'm not gone yet, and sometimes when there are lots of cars and there's lots of activity, it can be a little daunting, especially if there are seniors who are a little bit more challenged.
So what help me understand, so the idea being that the majority of the folks would enter through here, come up this aisle, turn right, and park in these spaces, or continue down and park in those spaces?
If they're available,
Yep.
but to get in and out of to get to the senior center, for many seniors who have mobility issues, I would think the back would be an easier place for them to park.
Just as a clarification, when we did have these meetings with the town staff and the town departments, and this is a question that can be brought up and discussed with the director, the senior center director, Jill. But I think they're trying to concentrate the entrance to the senior center to be in the front of the building, so there's not multiple entrances and flows through the building. I think they want to control the flow of people going into the senior center. But once again, could be part of the construction of the senior center. But I think they were trying to keep people funneling through the front of the building so they knew who was in the building at all times. I think that's one of the reasons why we put all the spaces in the front of the building for the ADA spaces.
I mean, I think the majority of seniors, their biggest fear is hitting a child.
Right.
And with the rec center right next door, and since most seniors use senior centers during the day, and kids would be coming after school if there was enough activities for them to come to. And I think that's, my concern is just that circulation, and how do you segregate so the seniors feel a little bit safer, and the kids stay safe.
Are you thinking of like a segregated handicap parking lot, or?
In the ideal world,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, in other communities where they've planned seniors, they've had, with a combined, which it probably will be with Gus Canny at some point, segregated entrance so that the seniors can go in and out in one area. If there are, adolescents going in another area, or people are bringing their young children for activities at Gus Canty. And I think you hear that loud and clear. We just don't want to get into a situation where we could interfere with or cause harm to any child.
Just as a comment, as everyone knows, the senior center has not even been started yet. It hasn't gone into construction. There's been some, renderings and there's some concepts drawn, but I think with this design of the parking lot and the increase in spaces, I think there is, however the design of the entrances and the exits of the senior center is, I think there's room to be able to put the ADA spaces in the back or the ADA spaces in the front. That may be more of a, when they get into the design of the building, to be able to put where the actual spaces would actually go. I mean, there's plenty of room in there to add additional accessible spaces.
So Pam, and to your point, one of our thoughts were, what we tried to do is, so in locating these here, they're obviously close to the front entrance.
Right.
We have a drop-off too, so when they're utilizing vans or some other kind of public transportation, a nice convenient area for drop-off either by their family or by public transportation. The other nice thing is not having parking on the opposite side makes it a little bit more comfortable, to your point, a little bit less activity around it, so when they're backing out of these spaces, there's nothing they need to worry about behind them, and they have a little bit extra paved area to back out into when you get out. So I think to Paul's point too, I mean, this to your kind of vision, this is like the ideal spot to put all the handicap spaces in. If
Or
it
an
works out
adequate
that-
amount.
Yeah.
Or-
So I think the nice thing is we, depending on how the building shakes out and how the discussion shakes out, we have a plan that kind of accommodates them at the front as conscientious as we can. And then we have another plan at the back that could work with little or no sacrifice. So I think at this point, this is what we have, and hopefully as the design develops, we can reach some sort of happy medium.
Bob?
I just wonder if having it two ways right in front of the building wouldn't work better if it was one way. You know, thinking of people backing out, it's easier to look over your right shoulder as opposed to your left if you're trying to back, if you're going to back out to head back through the entrance. If you were at an angled spot along that first row, you could back out that way and then circulate around through one of the other two-way lanes. I just think it would be a little bit easier and probably a little safer if it was one way. If you came in and you came into that first row and then you parked along those spaces along there, and then when you backed out, you proceeded heading in the same direction that you came in, down and made a loop through the other section of the parking lot, as opposed to trying to back out and then go back in that same lane to back out of a spot and then head back down to that entrance and exit. Just a thought.
Paul?
Yeah, one final comment. If I remember correctly, there is dedicated parking for the police station at this time. This appears that there's no more dedicated area for the police. Is that correct?
No, so right now,
Well, that's what I'm saying.
this is connected, this entrance is connected through this parking. So the parking behind the Eddie Marks building is connected to this driveway through this zone here. So there's a common parking area here and a driveway coming through here.
But at the present time, it's dedicated for police only.
The area
And
in
now
front
it's
of the police
open for
station?
anybody. Is that what's intended?
I think I'm missing.
Just look at that, that's all. My understanding is that the area in front of the police station is dedicated for police activities only. You don't park there if you're going to county canny or ball game or something. That's only for, now it's open season. Is that correct?
Correct. So, but it's still in the same location, so
Yeah.
it could get administered the same way. The idea is to segregate the parking activities of the public from this driveway. So that when we said kind of give the police a segregated entrance, it's isolating this driveway from the rest of the parking operations that happen at the front of the building and near the Eddie Marks building.
I have one quick question. Do you lose parking places when you make them,
Yes.
I can't even think of the word I want to use.
Angle
parking,
spaces.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah. The exchange you get is you can make the aisle a little narrower, because to
Right.
your point is you're pulling in and backing out, you need less aisle space. If you have a 90-degree stall, that's what we call the ones that are straight in and straight out, you really need 22, 24 feet behind it in order to get a car in and out comfortably. And particularly if you're talking seniors and handicap spaces.
John?
What are your thoughts on, I see you have the driveway for the police entrance and exit dedicated to the police station. What happens when somebody drives in there by mistake and there's a gate at the end? Is there any way they can turn around to get back out onto 28?
They shoot 'em.
we're going to have to
You just have to
sign that and
know
make
the
sure.
code to get through the gate?
I mean, it is pretty, it's pretty sequestered, because Eddie Marks is pretty close and the cemetery's right there. But to your point, maybe what we'll have to do is do some sort of kind of little turnaround
Just a
before we get
thought,
to the
because
gate.
You know somebody's going to make that mistake.
I've done it twice.
And you don't want to back out onto 28.
Yeah, I think to that point, I think the simple remedy would have put a little turnaround here, so that if that happens, they can come in and turn around.
Just a thought.
I know, I think that's a really good thought.
Pat?
I've got the same concerns that Paul does, because when you are giving the total number of parking spaces here, which 250, okay, now you're incorporating into that the 10 or more spaces that are, or have been in front of the police building for police patrons, let's say. Okay, I've never been there when they've all been full, but I've been there when there may be 5 or 6 cars there.
At the police station.
Yeah, it depends upon what's going on. So functionally, you're losing that out of the total that you give here as a total. Functionally, you're losing 25 spaces here that are for employees only. So I'm really beginning to question whether there are sufficient parking spaces, because one of the complaints about the senior center is there are never, ever enough parking spaces there, and the intention is that a new building will bring in far more people to use the facility. So when you do that, I don't know how many parking spaces there currently are at the senior center. That would have to be determined, and I'd say you'd have to at least double that.
I think at the, I'd be guessing, but I think at the existing senior center across the street on Dillingham, 30 to 40 spaces over there.
Okay?
I'd say probably 30 to 40 spaces.
And lots of
over
times they don't have sufficient
there.
parking.
And they park in the little mall, strip mall across the street.
You got it.
Yeah.
Or along the street, or wherever they can find it.
Yep.
So I think you'd have to say you'd have to at least double those. And what I'm looking at here is, okay, you're saying 90. Oh, that's just probably barely enough for anticipated use. So I venture a guess that when we're talking about putting a large new use in there, which hopefully I would assume also anticipate greater usage of the rec center, I'm not sure we have enough parking spaces here.
During the meetings that we did have with the town offices, we were looking at sizing the buildings and doing the calculations to the buildings. As you can see in the plan, it's a little light on this plan, but we sized the Eddie Marks building to 10 spaces. We took the square area of the first floor. The police station, we did the first and second floor. The Gus Canny, we did the floor and then had that reduction. And so what was left over, we said the senior center. So they basically did a capacity loading on the senior center with the amount of spaces. The senior center could be 20,000 feet, 20,000 square feet. You're only going to get 3 times the amount of parking spaces that are in the parking lot. So I think that was the concept when we were trying to figure out, maximize the parking in the lot.
Yeah, and to Pete's point, we're kind of at the maximum of what kind of safe number of parking spaces we can create. So really the only thing that can give now is the senior center and the operations there.
Hey, Brian?
Yeah, to your point, Pat, about the parking drives the building, not vice versa, under our bylaws, you know. And that's really the purpose of our being here tonight, is to see what we can safely design in terms of circulation and traffic control out on the public ways and in the parking fields, taking into account the board's very germane comments, that will essentially drive the design of the building and its seated occupancy. Back in 1987, we did the same thing. I wasn't here, but the same process occurred for the Gus Canty Center. Seated capacity. They actually came to the planning board back in 1987 for a parking reduction. So that's where the 150 parking spaces on the summary sheet comes from. That's dedicated to the Canty Center. We can always change that summary to include, half a dozen or so for public parking for the police department. Whatever left over that we can safely design and incorporate into this design will drive the design for the architect of the senior center. That's why we're here tonight.
I heard one thing, that you didn't have any allocation for the second floor of Eddie Marks building, and I heard the selectmen talking about coming up with new uses for that. So you probably need to keep that in the mix, because I believe that's coming too.
Right.
Not to go too much on the, on that case, right now on the second floor, the Eddie Marks is storage up there. There's storage on the second floor, so we took the first floor.
Okay, so
With conversations with the building department, the building commissioner, with this design, we took the first floor area.
I want to ask some questions about drainage, lighting, and landscaping. Can we move on?
So,
Want to talk a little bit about the drainage plan?
yeah, perfect, next slide. Then
Yeah.
That's the next slide. So, as far as grading and drainage, really the idea here was, the parking lot is graded pretty well. It's got a little bit of wonkiness to it, but what we wanted to do is we gave it a little bit more kind of a more direct flow pattern rather than kind of undulating a bit. The idea there being is we don't want to change grades because that really adds cost if we can otherwise avoid it. So essentially most of the runoff comes from the front of the Gus Candy Center and heads towards the street. It's intercepted in the aisle right before that last row of parking. We propose something a little bit differently, would be to push all that drainage against the curb where the parking lot is. It gets rid of the catch basins in the drive aisle, and it prevents a lot of abuse from those grades getting run over by vehicles and by plows.
That was my question. I see all these drains being removed. You're going to fill them up and allow the water to run all the way up to the front of the site and deal with it there?
Yes. And then they would go into infiltrating basins that would be in the landscape area between the trees that are out there.
So the existing landscaping and trees are staying?
Yes. And the monument that's there, right now that monument's a little close to the parking. It's about 2 feet off the edge of parking, so we might want to look a little bit closer at that. And the other thing too we show here is granite curb around all the islands, so a little bit more robust island treatment. We also have lights in those islands and lights placed in such a way that it allows for plowing a little bit more easily than currently accommodated. So generally speaking, is water would flow this way towards this curb line and get picked up in catch basins along that edge, and then flow generally this way to a catch basin in this corner here. This catch basin is probably about 3 feet away from an existing basin, and there's a couple other ones in the parking lot as well.
How are you dealing with the roof runoff?
Right now, I think the roof runoff discharges to grade at Eddie Marks. I'm not sure how it's accommodated at the rec center.
The police station's a flat roof and it goes to drains on the side. The rec center, I'm not sure how that comes out. I imagine it would come off the side of the building into drains too.
In the drains or into the parking lot, you know?
But the back of the building would go to rec center, the building would go down the driveway to the back of the building. There's probably a 10-foot drop between the front of the building and the back of the building. And anything in the front of the buildings would come towards Main Street.
One other item on drainage, we're paving that back road now, so it's going from a sort of impervious surface, or sort of pervious surface with the gravel driveway. We're making it asphalt. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to install a French drain between the driveway and the walkway that's going to be against the football field, so that water would run off this way to a drain that, just like a French drain, you see a foundation drain, so just stone, so it goes right in there, it's allowed to infiltrate, and we don't have any increased runoff from that new pavement.
So your calculations for these drains, I guess I'm not clear. Do they include the runoff from the roof of the Gus Candy Center or not?
We didn't incorporate that in the calculations. We just tried to maintain the same.
Do you know if it runs into the parking lot now? Because you're taking out these drains in the middle of the lot. I'm just wondering if you've got all the runoff.
I think currently, right now, the drains in the middle of the lot, right now, Public Works, a lot of times if you go out there in a heavy rainstorm, it's flooding. Those drains that are in that parking lot now basically past their useful life, they're dead. So they'd have to be either rejuvenated and rebuilt anyways. So, If we take them out, you could replace them in kind in the same area, you could just push it to the front. That's something that, Alicia, that's something that could appear in the design, right?
Yeah, sure. And we generally are pretty conservative when we, as you can see, we've got 4 catch basins along that edge. So when we design a catch basin, we can handle about 2 CFS each catch basin. So in our calculations, we could comfortably handle half the rec center roof. Admittedly, though, I'm not so sure how it's routed to the basins. So if it were half the roof came to the front of the building and half the roof went to the back, we could safely accommodate those in the 4 basins that we show. But what I'm concerned about is if it's an underground connection, we got to make sure that we maintain whatever drainage infrastructure serves that roof system.
I just think it's a lot of distance from any, if it is roof runoff, all the way to those drains in the front. That's a lot of water.
What I think you find is that even if you put basins midstream, what happens is what's called flow slipping, is most of the flow goes right past the basins and ends up against the curb line at the bottom end anyway.
Got the capacity. So the landscaping is really just what we already have, right? You're not really changing anything?
If you want to go to the next slide, you just, yeah, there's not a whole lot of palette available to do things, but what we did is there's a couple of elm trees that are dying or dead that we designate for removal and replace with a couple lindens. Then we spoke a little bit earlier about framing the entry to the police memorial and the flag with 2 new, I think these are honey locusts to match the species that is currently in front of the police station. And then there's a nice oak here. The idea was, again, to create sort of an entry statement here with some additional oaks, and then really the only other options for kind of getting some vertical relief is at the front of the building here and here. The idea being there is there's kind of an established pedestrian pathway through that area, looking to kind of create some definition with those 2 trees. I would imagine those trees would probably have to be considered as part of the actual facility design because they're so close. But not a whole lot of opportunity to do too many things given how many parking spaces we're trying to create.
Oh,
Just a final comment. This is a very difficult site. It's a good layout for the parking, given the constraints of the site. The fact of the matter is we're shoehorning another building in the site that creates problems in that area, and there's not a lot of opportunity to do anything different than what you have. So,
Yeah, I agree.
I understand where
There's
you're
a lot
coming
of push and
from.
pull between Jim and I in terms of even 2 or 3 parking spaces, trying to, I mean, I'd like islands to be a little bit bigger, I'd like there to be a little bit more space, but really it's a matter of trying to get as much as we can, safely though.
But again, I would look at the police area, and particularly the area behind the Dust Canyon, because that whole area is for handicap parking. Now you have 2 spaces. So I suggest taking a good look at that. And the access now to the ball field and during construction is going to be an issue that I'm sure you can handle.
Yeah, and so just on that, like an issue, speaking of issues during construction, some things that we want to keep in mind as we go forward is this entrance is going to require us to relocate a hydrant and relocate a section of retaining wall. So that's something, it's not as easy as just cutting a driveway, and there's some work that has to go on there. Certainly, there's a lot of really nice mature trees out there. So we are pushing parking a little bit into the landscape area. We want to be really diligent to make sure that what we're proposing doesn't negatively impact those trees, because it would be a shame to lose a 24-inch tree and be left putting up a 4-inch tree in its place. We'll all be dead and gone by the time it achieves the glory that's already there. Then we also got to make sure at the entrance here there's an existing utility pole, so that's kind of one of the goals, was to get that utility pole out of the way of exiting and entering police traffic.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And we specifically didn't do any lighting in this area because the idea is with the Main Street improvements that might come down, we want to make sure that light fixture is consistent with that streetscape. What we currently show here is a 16-foot pole utilizing a fixture similar to the one that's behind the fire station. And what we found is, we did the photometrics for that, just to test out, to make sure that the spacing we show is reasonable, and we should get adequate coverage on that with the spacing that we showed there.
How about keeping the light on the site and not up in the sky? Are these lights designed to keep the light down?
Yeah, so they're down fixtures, and they actually have a hood on the top to prevent exactly that.
John?
How many employees do you expect to have between the two structures?
Again, we were sort of designing to the site, not to the actual needs, so we never even actually discussed that.
So I thought
This
you
is
talked
as many
about-
as you can fit.
I understand it, but I thought
That was
they-
the exercise.
I thought they mentioned like 25 spots for employees in the back.
Yeah, and the reason for that is not so much as they're dedicated for employees, it's because of the nature of those spaces. They're not ideal from a parking layout. So I wouldn't want my mother trying to park on an 8% grade. We tried to soften it a little bit by angling down the grade. So if you had to pull in an 8% grade, your door's gonna swing open, and it's gonna be hard to open the door that's on the uphill side. So the idea there is designated them as employee spaces. These are people that we can control how they're used. People know what they're getting into, and maybe the people that are more comfortable parking in those spaces would use those as opposed to a general public. So not so much they're earmarked towards any particular employee count as much as the nature of how they're going to get used.
So whoever gets there last gets those spaces, right?
Well, they're pretty close, so if you don't mind holding your door open, they are pretty close to the rec center.
Thank you.
So it looks like you've got catch basins, so you're keeping all the drainage, none of it's going out into the road. You seem to be trying to capture it all.
Correct. So there's this area here, there's an existing basin that we're keeping. Slightly bigger area, but we're keeping that basin at the bottom of the hill. It's at the low point, so everything ends up going down the low point. If we get a high rain event, it's going to pool for a little while, but it's all going to stay on site. Same thing in the back parking area here. There's 2 catch basins that we're just going to reset as part of the grading we're doing.
And the road going back is pitched to run everything back into the site. Is that what I see?
The road going back to Dillingham, yeah, pitched so, as we're looking at the plan, from right to left.
Left to the left.
So it goes back into a drain that's right between the...
Running all along the edge.
Exactly.
So you have made accommodations to keep everything on the site?
Yes. And we also have a timber guardrail to segregate. One of the things that Jim and I talked about was, as you pave an aisle, it sort of encourages people to maybe drive a little quicker. So what we want to do is make sure there's some physical demarcation between that drive aisle and the rest of the kind of the recreational fields. So there's a timber guardrail that separates the traffic movement going out to Dillingham from the rest of the activity on the fields.
Anybody else?
If you don't mind, if I could just add a quick
Please
comment.
do.
Excuse me, John.
Go ahead.
Peter, we're relying on you. If this doesn't work, we're going to be coming after you.
Right. I plan on being here for a little while, so. Town meeting, I don't want to digress from this project, but town meeting, the police chief is going for a capital project to redo his police area behind the police station, which includes adding 19 spaces all along this area and adding several more back there. So he's going from 52 to 71, I believe. He's adding almost 20 spaces. It's all for his employees. During the Commodore games, they get the foul balls. The employees don't want to park there, so they switch back and forth. But the way the police vehicles, they park up against the building, and then the private vehicles will park up back. But regardless of the site being used for the proposed senior center, or the Gus Candy Center, or the Eddie Marks building, the way it's set up right now and the design right now, and the police chief, we've had some discussions on this, it's not conducive to a good exit for the police department. And it's kind of amazing that there hasn't been, with a police vehicle on a run at this time, with the Gus Candy, the way it's set up, there hasn't been a collision or an accident. So I think no matter what happens on that site, this segregated and separate entrance to the police station, I believe it really needs to happen, no matter what happens on the site. But the theory is to have it done, to have the police entrance done and the back of the building done before construction starts on this, so the police vehicles won't be dealing with construction barrels, cones, and dust, and people coming trying to get out if they're going on a call. So the police chief does have a capital item, a separate capital item for the second isolated roadway and the police station, the back of the police station, because it's, anyone that's been over there on the public nights, it's kind of horrendous back there. There's a lot of broken pavement, a lot of potholes. You can twist your ankle pretty good back there. So you're going to see that at town meeting as a separate, I think it's Article 4.
Yeah, power pole removed too.
Right.
You know how difficult that is.
So what they're looking at doing, that if you go behind, I don't want to get away from this project, but if you go behind the police station, the lighting is it's dark back there. They got a building light and they got two lights on wooden utility poles. We're looking at doing the same thing with the lights, similar to 25 King Street. Same type of lighting, the down lighting, but it'll be able to give coverage over the parking lot. So if the officers or anyone else that's going out, going to be able to work on that. So.
Good luck moving the power pole.
Yes.
Any other comments? Anyone from the public?
Trying to make a silk purse out of the salad. Good luck.
So we'll put this off for your agenda next week. We'll come up with some recommendations for your plan review.
Okay,
We're good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, what's next?
Thank you.
That's, Jim, planning board discussion.
They didn't get up to easy, did they?
I think it's
Planning board discussion, recommendation of zoning articles for fall town meeting. Lynch Blacksmith Shop Road. Okay, we've got a plan for
So
that.
in your package, you should have a letter from Attorney Kirk, together with a plan. It's self-explanatory for the board's discussion. Attorney Kirk is here tonight with us. If you have any questions. But essentially, quickly, should have this, a plan,
Yep,
and a letter from Attorney Kirk. Essentially puts a 100-foot buffer, a 75 to 100-foot buffer of Ag A around the site. You add then into that, to the equation, a 25-foot separation between the zones. So it's about, it would be a 125-foot, a 100-foot to a 125-foot buffer where the panels would be away from the property line.
so we're not rezoning that buffer that ranges from 75 to 100 feet.
Correct, that would remain
Agricultural, and it would be
agricultural A,
ground-mounted solar arrays are not allowed within 20 feet of that. Is that correct?
25.
25?
That's the proposal.
So,
You remember one of the reasons we were talking about, the board was talking about maybe those areas that were in blue last time. We also have to allow for the fact that to drive their vehicles around to maintain these, to get back and forth. The activities will be related to the solar panels, so that's why you see the buffer area and the rest of the zone light industrial.
Yeah. So they're amenable to that buffer with the exception of that little section.
Yeah, you have to be able to access from the public way.
Right.
That's a piece of little town-owned property there to the south. But you can't access a more restricted zone or less restrictive zone through a more restrictive zone. So that's why it goes all the way up to blacksmith shop.
I think it's a good compromise on a compromise.
John?
So one of the concerns that the neighbors had was that if this gets rezoned in the future, if solar doesn't work out or it gets changed, that there could be other uses there that aren't allowed currently. But even if that happened, they would now have a 100-foot buffer from their property line for any structure, if I understand this correctly. Even if it
75
wasn't.
and 25 is 100, right.
Yeah, so
Between
so
100
there's
and
no
25
structure,
and 100.
no structure be allowed within 100 feet of the neighbor's property lines, whether it was a building or a solar panel.
Yeah, or a parking lot for vehicles.
Now, let's go over there's, light industrial C has very limited uses. No residential, ground-mounted solar array, a contractor's yard, and what else?
Warehouse buildings
Warehouse
to the contracts.
for the contractors.
It's not retail warehouse.
Not retail warehouse, just warehouse for contractors' materials and contractors'
Like a-
yards, they can store trucks outside.
Right, it wouldn't be, it'd be like a Granite Electric. A warehouse for, it wouldn't be Home Depot. It would be like Granite Electric,
Okay,
a wholesaler to the trades.
But any structure would be 100 feet from their property line, and if the use changed from solar panel, would the change of use have to come back in front of this board if it was going to be a contractor's yard or a
permitted
warehouse?
use,
It's a permitted use?
yeah, it's a by right, once we change it, it's a by right use, they go in and get their building permit.
But it means the buildings or parking must be 100 feet away.
With site plan review?
Yes.
1,000 square feet of building or 5 parking spaces trigger site plan review. So anything they would do would trigger site
Come
plan
back in
review.
front
Yeah,
of the
they
board.
would, we would have site.
That's what I'm asking. I know the neighbors have concerns, and I'm trying to
Right, it would be
address
subject to a
everything.
plan review, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone from the public, any comments or questions? Yes, sir, could you please come into the microphone, identify yourself?
Yes, my name's Robert Sagerman. I live on Deer Pond Road. I've been in contact with the neighbors, people abutting this, and our concern is still the fact that you are taking and opening this up in the middle of a residential area. I mean, over time, that whole pit has become surrounded by houses. And I really would not like to see a contractor yard in my backyard, or, as this, I have printed it out, the warehouse and storage buildings. I mean, so we're not against the solar, but we are really against taking and opening the door to future use if the solar doesn't work. I mean, we're really strongly opposed to changing the zoning to this light industrial C. And our question for you and to Mr. Kirk was, why can't they do like a contract zoning so that the only use can be solar as opposed to opening it up? I know somebody was talking about when they did the Dome restaurant in Woods Hole. In order to get all those houses, they agreed to that was what they would do. It was called contract zoning, it was called.
I'm
And
lost.
Mr. Kirk, Attorney Kirk, I'm sure could explain what contract zoning is to you.
Do you know what contract zoning is, Brian?
Yes, I do, and I'm familiar with the Dome case. Now, the town typically doesn't do contract zoning. The town was not a party to the restrictive covenant between the Woods Hole Community Association and the property owners of the Dome. That was a private restriction between those two parties. The town was not a party. The Attorney General has ruled that contract zoning is really not preferred. you can't really
No,
negotiate.
I missed a word.
The Attorney General's office has indicated to us that they really don't like contract zoning. That's why we don't do it. We
If
did
they
it
don't like it, doesn't mean they can't do it, though.
back in the 80s, it was big, and sometimes in the 90s. That's why we didn't enter into a contract on Woods Hole Road there with the Dome project. The zoning you can't bargain away your police power. Zoning is a police power. So it has to stand on its merits. Not to say that the neighbors can't get together with their other property owners and create a private restriction, just like they did in Woods Hole. But the public doesn't, you, the planning board, aren't a party.
I guess our fear is just opening up a door that if the solar doesn't work, that you are now putting it says a contractor's yard as defined, and I don't know what the definition of a contractor's yard is, what you're going to have happening, a wholesaler to the trade supply house. I mean, does that mean you're going to have, what is a supply house and what is the traffic that you're going to generate? Warehouse and storage buildings. Again, we're concerned that you're opening up our neighborhood to light industrial use.
We absolutely are. And a warehouse, Brian, I think you said that something like Granite Electric that sells electric materials to the trades
This is an example.
is an example, so there could be, absolutely.
And we're really, while we're not at all opposed to the solar, as a neighborhood association, we are opposed to having this into our yards, into our
Okay.
backyards.
Are you speaking for yourself, or are you president of a neighborhood association?
I guess I'm the president of Deer Pond Road Association, which is all of Deer Pond Road, and I've spoken to the people on, the Gifford Street extension, and I know we spoke with the people who abut this on the other side, I guess by Lower Road, and in speaking to those people, I know they are also opposed to anything except the solar. But I do speak for the Deer Pond Road Association, yes.
Discussion, okay. So how do the other members of the board feel about the zoning issue?
Just procedurally, you don't have to make a decision tonight.
No.
You have the 24th, the 30th, and the night of town meeting if you have to. If you need to think about it some more, but that's what's on the table.
Or again, why they can't be given permission to do the solar farm and yet not do any of the other light industrial use.
Because that would be something called a variance, a use variance, which we don't do anymore. And I think the town used to do it years ago, but they stopped it, Brian, a while ago.
1978.
So the state said don't do it anymore.
Okay.
Because what people were doing is every time we'd make zoning and they keep changing, giving use variances, it didn't make any sense. You make rules and then you break them. You make rules and you break them. They said stick with the zoning, and that's,
Okay.
I have a thought, and I haven't really thought it out very much at all since it just popped into my head. But can you do an overlay zone which protects the underlying existing zone and then do an overlay for strictly solar?
First, that's not what's in front of the board, but if I understand your question, you have a one-use zone that overlays. No.
Can't do that?
No.
There has to be some way, I mean, I totally understand, and I think if I lived there, I would feel the very same way, that if somehow down the road, there's going to be something that's going to overtake solar and replace it.
Well, but that's the question in front of the board. And the gentlemen and the petitioners have made their issues in front of you. That's why you're paid the big bucks.
That's
A
right,
very,
I'm
very
retiring on that.
very legitimate questions in front of the board. That's why they have planning boards.
So is there an option other than rezoning?
I
The
know,
options in front of the board at the moment is light industrial C as it stands on its merits. There has been some discussion about restrictive covenants and, party agreements on the side, but that's not what's in front of the board. You must make a decision, is this an area suitable for this zoning designation as proposed, based on what you've heard from all the parties. That's what's in front of the board.
Just one other point.
And Jim?
I'm not in consideration. I've been under the impression that that area is a water recharge area for the town. I mean, I have not gone and asked anybody in the town whether that's true or not, but I was under the assumption that we were in a water recharge area as well.
No, again, to read
And I don't know.
two matters, we're kind of straying away from,
Okay.
the public hearing is closed. So we're sort of straying
So
away.
it's discussion, right.
But for your information, it is not in a water resource protection district.
Okay, it is not?
It's-
Thank you.
You're on. But
And
that's what's in front of the board.
We're looking to make a recommendation or not make a recommendation. And whether we recommend it or not recommend it still doesn't prevent it from getting on the warrant, does it?
You're correct. Yours is a recommendation. It's not binding on town meeting.
town meeting does whatever they
Right,
want.
in town meeting, so.
They look to you for a recommendation, essentially.
I know we had a lot of discussion when we were going to create these zones. We were trying to look at, have them being contiguous and looking at, although we did, the first one we did change was agricultural zone on Thomas Landers. There was a petitioner's article that took we created the district and they applied it to an agricultural zone at a past town meeting. But when we were working on it, we were looking at taking industrial A and B and changing it to C. Because the reason why we were going that way primarily was A and B allowed residential uses, and the residential uses sucked up all the industrial land and we didn't have anything left. So we created new industrial land primarily to create contractors' yards, and then the solar, and that kicked in, then we figured solar was a better play, but the whole reason being was for the contractors who leaving the town.
You're also rezoned up on Route 151, that AGAA land.
Right. So there was a couple of agricultural areas that we have done, and that is separate from the rest, and it's been done. So there's
precedent.
Precedent both ways. Question if we want to do it or not.
I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, out of fairness, I think Mr. Attorney Kirk would like to address the board.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ignore you, I just didn't see you.
The lights are dim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Edward Kirk, representing the applicant. The Lawrence Lynch and Borrego, the solar system, have been engaged in discussions and serious planning and engineering for over 6 months. If the town meeting votes to approve this, there's going to be a solar farm there. We haven't been going through this exercise for purposes of making some other use of the property other than a solar farm. It's just that this is the way we have to go. And we did try to take into account the concerns of the neighbors and did respond with the buffer, which between 100 and 125 feet, that's a third of a football field, is, I think, a reasonable balance to strike, because what it's trying to address is a situation that we don't expect is going to happen, that it's going to be solar, and it's not going to be either contractors' yards or warehouse. And of course, as you know, that I think the use as a solar is a pretty good use of this kind of property, which for all practical purposes has been put to industrial use for decades. And they're going to be below grade, and as I said before, no noise and no dust. So would like not to get caught between the reality of what we want to do and which the neighbors are supporting and concerns about something that's not going to happen. And we wouldn't want to have the concerns about what's not going to happen prevent you from making a positive recommendation about what we propose will happen. So I hope that the buffer is a reasonable balance to strike, and as has been pointed out, 30 years from now, I imagine if there was some other proposed use, if the solar days are over, there's all kinds of other controls, site plan review. So no matter what goes in there, if it was anything other than solar, this board will have maybe a different constitution of the board at that 30 years from now. But the town of Falmouth will have control, a certain degree of control over what goes in there. So we hope that you'll be able to see your way clear to a favorable recommendation.
I've had some experience with solar, and I somewhat disagree with you. The solar panels can disappear because of tax incentives and changes in the federal government laws overnight. And I was wondering, do you have your interconnection agreement negotiated with Eversource?
Those kinds of questions are, as they say, above my pay grade, Mr. Fox, but
I'm saying that because we did the solar field. That was the hardest thing.
Yeah.
That was and the most expensive. I'm just wondering if you've done it yet.
I can see it.
Mr. Zach Farkas, he's from
Excuse me, Brian has to correct something.
Just, I misspoke. I was thinking DEP Zone 2s. And Corey's just pulling up on the GIS here some information, so I think I might have misspoke to your question. It is...
Can we turn the projector on?
Sure. So where's Pilot Way? Shagbark. So just, if you can scroll up a little bit, Corey, for me. Other way. That's it. A little bit more. Yeah, okay, so it is in a water resource protection district under the local zoning bylaw.
It is?
It is. So you would have an extra regulatory review for any contractors' yards that might go in if they would make any part of the lot more than 15% impervious and some other restrictions. So
That doesn't affect this use, but the subsequent use it would.
Other uses would be subject to the restrictions. Yeah, so I misspoke to the question. It was bothering me, so I had Corey look it up. It is in a local water resource protection district, the entire parcel. Okay?
You're all set. We corrected ourselves.
Thank you.
Very good, Brian. Glad you caught that.
Mr. Farkas, he's the project manager. I think maybe he was coming up to address the chairman's question about contracts with the...
Eversource.
Thanks, Corey.
Sure. Good evening to the board. Zach Farkas, Borrego Solar for the record. As Attorney Kirk noted, this is not a speculative ask of the board. We've tried to strike the right balance of investing development funds in what we call diligence work to make sure there is a project here that we can kill our brain cells over right now discussing. And we've applied for our interconnection application with Eversource. We're in the middle of what's called the System Impact Study. We've had our initial screening review, and we've received very favorable results from Eversource. Borrego is a very experienced company. We've done more solar in Massachusetts than anyone in the country, and we have a very high degree of certainty that solar is feasible on this lot from an interconnection standpoint. We already have our site control. Our lease option is fully executed with Lawrence Lynch, and really the last piece of the pie here is understanding the path to permitting. We reached out to the town to understand different options. We tried for kind of the variance option or special permit or some other way around going through the town meeting process, which we'd like to avoid. But we were directed that this was really the only way to do it. I think you brought up a great point about solar overlay districts. They're possible. They're very hard when there's not one existing already. The town of Barnstable uses one, and so you could theoretically amend one, but in order to create one, it takes a lot of engineering work and a very big lift. And so with the history of this parcel as a gravel pit, as a sand excavation pit, as Attorney Kirk noted, it's largely been used in an industrial manner for a while. I think we would certainly not be before you if it was not a disturbed site. And we're trying to contain any type of work that we do to the gravel pit area. And from a practical nature, we wanted to put that buffer around to first give those setbacks for any future use. Certainly setbacks for solar is fine. The areas that we set back are largely the only treed areas that are available too. So you've got a visual buffer as well as the practical reality of building 50 feet below the grade. And so I don't know what the restrictions are for warehouses or other yards. I'm sure you can't go too tall on those buildings. So I'm here to answer any kind of solar specific questions, but I know the focus is on rezoning and not necessarily on the solar at this point.
I think we're trying to talk about the neighbors' concerns, and so that
Sure.
I think I heard I kept hearing you say the site's below grade. You mean it's below the grade of the abutting properties?
Surrounding grade.
So that they won't see it.
That's correct.
And your point is well taken. If it's 50 feet down and they build 35 feet up, but they still won't see it if they build a warehouse. Is that rough?
You have to decide whether the use of the land, this land is consistent with the uses that may be allowed.
Right.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand
Yes,
possible warehouse.
correct. And
Use.
the attendant impacts.
And then I think I heard you say that because it's in a water resource district, that any of those uses would come up under another review as well.
Correct. You have your plan review, and anything over, there are some other restrictions that would trigger a special permit through the Board of Appeals. And when you're in a water resource protection district, you can't store hazardous materials, you can't have gasoline storage. There's a lot of restrictions. You couldn't warehouse fertilizer or
So,
any of those things in these districts.
so we have zoning in place to protect
Correct.
that. That's what I was just trying to understand.
Correct. And if you had one over a certain previous special permit. And outright prohibitions on junkyards, certain storage of hazardous materials, more than household quantities. Right. So even if you had a contractor's yard, you couldn't be storing fuel or certain things. You'd have to have a pervious surface, capture things in them.
Pat, do you have some more questions?
Yeah, I do. You said your company has had more experience in Massachusetts than any other company. And I'm really curious as to what kind of lifespan you expect of solar panels.
The site control agreement we have with Lawrence Lynch Corporation is for 30 years. It's a 20-year base with 2 5-year extensions. The usable life of a solar panel, it degrades over time in terms of production, not physically, but the amount of kilowatt hours it produces per panel degrades at a rate of 0.5% per year. So do the math out for 30 years, you're still operating at about 85% efficiency. So there's a lot of juice left in those panels to keep producing. So the theoretical lifespan of the panels can keep going on, but we're kind of stuck in that scenario where solar is still relatively new. I know it's been around for a long time, but in terms of being deployed at this level, we're half a decade into kind of a serious impact of solar across the nation. So we run into the question with the landowners, well, what's going to happen in 20 years? So that's basically the agreement we've started with. A lot of solar is done with municipalities, where a 20-year contract is the maximum they can do anyways. So all the equipment warranties and lease agreements and power purchase agreements are usually in that 20 to 30-year range. And so everything we're talking about from a solar standpoint for this site, we're talking about in a 30-year horizon. And in year 21, we'll kind of take a breath and see what's going on and see if we want to keep going. Got to imagine the technology is going to be a lot better by then. but we kind of cross that bridge when we get there, and obviously anything that would happen on that site would have to remain with the site plan review, otherwise we'd be coming back for some type of site plan modification or new one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And just one point of, for avoidance of doubt, Mr. Curie brought up the impervious surfaces. With the solar installation, the amount of impervious surfaces are introduced are minimal, limited to the equipment pads only. So we wouldn't trigger anything. We'd be well below any type of impact thresholds to a water recharge area or resource area. And a lot of the work we do is with water districts. We recently did one with the Onset Water District in Wareham. So the DEP has reviewed solar as a use in water resource areas ad nauseam.
How many megawatts is this project?
Right now, we're targeting about 7 megawatts DC, 5 megawatts AC. It'll be built under the new incentive program in Massachusetts that's coming out in the middle of next year. And so the structure is a little different from the landfill project you guys have. But from a scale perspective, it'll be, I guess an acreage perspective, it'll be somewhat larger. I think the landfill project's about 4 megawatts. And so it won't be twice the size because the modules we're going to use are going to be much more efficient. So we're looking at a footprint of about 23 to 25 acres. And there's a couple different scenarios where we're spanning the utility easements that go through there. So it's hard to know exactly what we're looking at. But the base of the pit is about 35 acres, and we'll use about 25 round numbers.
Anybody else?
Well, I think I have heard enough discussion that I feel relatively assured that this will not provide an impact to the neighbors, at least certainly not in my lifetime and not in your lifetime, and maybe you'll outlive that. And so I'd like to move that we endorse this zoning article for the warrant.
So your motion for the town meeting would be as recommended.
As recommended.
And that would be based on this plan.
Exactly Brian's words. So we move it as written and as...
Just to explain that right now, all your recommendations are as printed in the warrant. Mm-hmm. Your recommendation will be as recommended, which means it'll be different than the article.
That's because the warrant's already printed.
Even if it were printed, it'd be as recommended. Okay. You get the benefit. This went to the town meeting, to the finance committee for printing last week. You would be in the warrant that gets mailed out. But your motion on town meeting floor will be, I move Article 3 as recommended as such. I move to the town vote to blah, 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 blah. So as per this plan.
Okay. So what do you guys think?
So it's moved by
I need a
Pat.
second.
We need a second.
Second.
Further discussion. Bob, you're troubled.
Yeah, I tend to let town meeting decide these things, so I never really want to impede town meeting from having that chance to discuss it. So I tend to agree with our recommendations when we make them.
All right, ready for a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay.
Thank you all.
I had a lot of other questions for you, but they're inappropriate to this.
You guys are good.
David, I want to talk to you.
Good thinking.
Thank you.
Do you have a card I can leave?
I don't have one on me right now, but I can pass my information along to you.
Who gets to benefit from the solar?
We don't know yet. We generally don't work on
That's what I wanted to ask, and that's
You
not
guys are
appropriate.
right, yeah.
I'm gonna cover that some. I had 10 more of those questions. But
I'd be happy to.
Just report back.
I will report back. That's.
Okay.
I have all the same questions, but decided they're not tonight's. Okay, so we have a schedule of the precinct meetings.
We've got general correspondence first.
Okay, I missed that.
Agenda, there's your folder.
And that's right, we pulled this up. Okay. This is from the town of Mashpee. They've done this before. They're supposed to,
They have an old planner.
they're supposed to notify us,
They are,
and they don't.
and they didn't.
And then all of a sudden, they come to it, they find out they have to, so they're asking for a waiver, I guess?
Yes, the town of Mashpee, when you have a zoning article, one of the procedural requirements is that you notify the abutting planning boards of your around your community. Apparently, the Mashpee Planning Board failed to notice this board in a timely fashion. So the Mashpee Town Planner, on behalf of the board, is asking for this board to waive its notice requirement so they could alert the Attorney General that the board is unconcerned.
And we've done the same thing to other towns too, occasionally.
What does this refer to?
And there should be a copy of the article in there.
Trying to get to it. Article submitted by the Board of Select, which would delete the current sections, Design Review Committee, and and replace it with the new section, Design Review and Plan Committee. They're kind of doing what we did. They're doing the exact same thing, that they've taken back the design review and pulled it back into planning. That's only because the design review doesn't have staff reports, minutes. They violate open meeting law. You have to have a big organization to do open meetings. So that's pretty straightforward. Well, there's a lot of things here, Pam. I'm not going to be able to read them all right now. If you want to, there's about 10 things that they're doing. Take a quick look. It's a formality, though.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we get those and we put them in a folder somewhere and the planning board never sees them.
Never.
From Sandwich or from Bourne or from Mashpee. We scan them to see if there's anything terribly interesting, like we're going to change, 5,000 acres on the border with Sandwich to, some sort of, industrial zone. That would get our attention. That's why you also have a regional planning agency supposed to be looking at those things. But we normally, the board has in the past typically
Just said okay, yeah.
said okay, right. And vice versa when we've slipped up.
Yeah. So I would move then that we vote to grant Mashpee the waiver that they have requested.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Okay.
I think you should swap their wrist, too.
Yeah.
Well, ours would be black and blue too over the years. Oops.
Tom and I are good friends.
Okay, yeah, you're both retiring on the same day, huh?
We are both retiring on the same day.
Okay. Well, we usually divide up the precincts. Why don't you all hang on to this? We'll have time to take assignments next time, right? We don't, I want to think about it myself.
I'm going to 5.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it next meeting. We're not going to
You
talk
gonna
about it
do
right now.
Precinct 5 or 5?
Precinct 5, it's my precinct. I always
We'll
go
divide it up
precinct.
next time. We just wanted to, everyone has it, they need to be prepared. Future agenda items.
Can I have a-
Litigation.
Litigation. Brian, do you have a report on litigation for us?
You should have in your package Frank Duffy's litigation report on every town case, including your own.
Well,
Holy smokes.
Chairman,
Yes.
I notice there's 5 cases outstanding for the planning board, and some of them are 2 and 3 years old. What, do these ever come to pass?
Right now, one is in the appeals court, I believe. That's the one on West Falmouth Highway.
But that's at Superior Court.
It went to Superior Court, was dismissed, they've appealed to the appeals court. That's that little subdivision on West Falmouth Highway across from Chase Road. I believe 25 Crocker Road has been dismissed now for all those reasons. It's gone away. You have the one on 151 with Nathan Ellis Highway LLC is pending.
That's Cavosa.
That's Mr. Cavosa's suit. Is pending in the land court, I believe. And you have the Lantern Lane is still pending The Supreme Court has not yet ruled on further appellate review.
They're suing us, right?
Right, that's Lantern Lane, the land court upheld your decision, the appeals court upheld the land court, and they have asked for further appellate review to the Supreme Court.
Why?
Because they can't. And my sense is the Supreme Court won't hear it, but we haven't heard back yet. That's where they stand.
This is an awful lot are we supposed to have read all these things?
No, it's just for your information.
Okay, can you take it home and read it later?
But just so you know where your cases stand,
Yeah.
and sometimes you'll see Board of Appeals cases or Conservation Commission cases relate to the planning efforts here. But it's easier just to make a photocopy of everything for you than to
Okay.
try to disaggregate it.
I thought it was interesting. I thought most of the cases were against the Conservation Commission. They're really against the zoning board of appeals.
And you'll see there's a lot of labor and personnel and you know, yeah.
I would like to leave it on our next agenda so everyone has a chance to read it if they want to discuss anything. We
Sure.
might not, but I just don't,
That's fine.
we'll bring it up real quickly so you all do your homework. If you have any questions, you have a chance to bring it up, and we'll still be in order, okay?
Okay.
Fine.
Now, future agenda items. I have one. I have begun working with the 300 Committee for open space type projects within the Davis Straits. And I'd like to put it on the agenda and discuss it with you all sometime in the future. No rush. Doesn't have to be before town meeting, Brian.
Okay.
I just wanted to put it in there. Anybody else? Well, we usually, I'd like to put in committee reports sometime in the future. Again, we usually have it on every one. We
Try to get it once a month, usually the first Tuesday of the month, but that's town meeting, so we'll get it
Right
in
after
there.
town meeting, we'll do
Sure.
committee reports.
Okay.
And I suggested we also have a discussion on what results of town meeting, because it affects some of the recommendations we made. For example, this last item we talked about has been, we voted to put it up to town meeting. We'd like to have a discussion on what the results of town meeting was and what happens.
Okay. I got it.
What can we do about it?
Well, we might want to have a discussion about it.
Okay.
Got it.
Not everybody here is a town meeting member.
Yeah.
Don't bring that up.
I usually watch it anyway, so. That's it?
I think so.
Next meeting, October 24th.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you.
I told you not
Very
to.
good.